everybody. Hello. Welcome to H3, the show about health, hope, and happiness. I am Alan Friesen, otherwise known as the Acapellas. With me is brother Scott Sweetman. We hope to bring good tidings to you and lovely ideas for you to consider. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing tonight there, Scott?
Hi, I'm doing great. Still suffering from the loss of my main computer, so I'm broadcasting from my alternate studio,
Your
my
alternate
chair in the living room. Yeah.
Well, you're looking great. I have to add. So you're looking well. So good news.
Oh well, thanks. Yeah, and it's really interesting because tonight's video, I really think tonight's video that we're talking about is a life changer, and I recently got hurt on like in top of everything. And yeah, just reviewing it tonight because I first watched it. You sent it to me what, like 2 weeks ago, three
About
weeks
that.
ago,
Yeah.
almost now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I watched it right away because you said, "Oh, this is great." So I watched it and I was blown away. And then I got hurt, and then I watched it again tonight, and it's like, yeah, okay, yep. So yeah, it's a great video. What do you want to intro this for us? You sort
Yes.
of jumped right in.
Okay. So I follow this guy, Dr. Yanni Witten is his name, and he has the Pain Fix Protocol. And he's got like tons and tons of great videos that are regarding how you know, bomb proof your body, how you get your shoulders so they work well without pain, and your knees and your hips. And he has basically different exercises, strengthening, stretching type exercises and procedures in order to maximize the range of movement of your body in a pain-free way. So he's got all these great ideas, and I listen to him all the time. I think he's amazing. Anyways, the last a couple weeks ago here, 10 days ago here, he had this Dr. James on. What's James Chestnut? Dr. James
Chestnut.
Chestnut.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dr. James Chestnut on, and he had like a long interview with him. Like I'm going to say it was 90 minutes or something like that, the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it was
Just over
really
90 minutes. Yeah.
over 90 minutes. It was really quite well done, I thought, and very just the whole sequence of how he explains things, etc. And to me, it was a game changer. And part of it that I think makes absolute perfect sense is that dopamine and pleasure are really the same thing, or dopamine is the what produces pleasure for us, let's put it that way, right? They have an interconnectivity, and that dopamine slash pleasure are kind of a requirement for a good human life, right? It's not something that we should say, oh, pleasure, yeah, we don't want to do pleasure because that's bad, because a lot of times, especially from traditional religious views, they look at pleasure as being something evil or something to be avoided or something to, that kind of thing. You got to work hard and don't, power through all the pain and, pleasure. No, 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 we don't want that. But he's saying,
We even have a name for it, right? Hedonism
yes,
is the pursuit where, and I think that's important that you're putting this in now, is one of the first things that caught me is the vocabulary he uses is quite loaded in sort of Western Judeo-Christian culture. So like he talks about integrity, and when he first said it, I was like, okay, my understanding from comparative religion and philosophy uses that word differently than he intended it. So you have to be a little bit open to how he's using, and he's not using them incorrectly. He's just using them without a whole bunch of Judeo-Christian social modern loading in the words, right?
exactly. Yeah, no, well said. Yeah. So basically, the long and the short of it is, pleasure is something that we as humans enjoy, and it's not just sexual pleasure. I mean, there's pleasure in taking a deep, nice diaphragmatic breath. That's pleasurable. In enjoying a great meal, in feeling your body work well, and like, I'm not a runner, but if you went for a run, or that you do stretches and those stretches feel great, right? Or pleasure is, watching the sunset, like, that those are all things, or getting the early morning sunlight in your eyes, or you're feet in the grass, right? Those are all pleasurable type things as well.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
think that, sorry,
mhm.
sorry to
No,
interrupt,
no,
but for
you go.
me, what worked was that when he says pleasure, he's actually referring to the chemical release of dopamine.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not a value judgment.
No,
I mean, it does when he starts talking about choices, but what he actually means when he says a pleasurable state is when your body releases the chemical dopamine and our brains feel euphoria, right? Because of the dopamine. So that's what he's meaning, or when we're talking about pleasure tonight,
yes,
it could be anything that
yes.
releases dopamine, right?
It could be picking up your grandchild. It could be
Yeah. Well,
seeing
it
a
could be gambling, it could be pornography, it could be cheating on your spouse, anything that releases dopamine, and that's sort of
yeah,
the point of everything, right?
yes, exactly, and well said. And so then his thought process, if I followed him correctly, and I bought the book, it's my goodness, it's like 500 pages. It's going to take me
Wow.
a year to read it. But you're a quicker reader than I am, though. I'm slow reading, I'll tell you.
I want it when you're done.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So so basically the idea is there's pleasure for an instant, and then there's pleasure for long term. And so, as an example, if I had a substance abuse disorder, I would have pleasure that hit would be pleasurable for me. It would release dopamine for me. But in terms of its long term impact for me, it's not pleasurable, right? It causes all kinds of other problems, right? I might have pleasure in a um, in having sex with a stranger, as an example, but in terms of my long-term pleasure for my health and my well-being, not going to be conducive to that. So he, if I'm following him correctly, is marrying up picking or choosing things that are pleasurable, but also pleasurable in the instant and pleasurable in the long term. So then, if you, whatever you got happening now in your life, if you find one thing that you can add that has pleasure now and long term, or even that it's more, maybe it's not that pleasurable right now, but the long term effect from it, like if I go exercise, maybe I'm less than enthused about going to exercise, but for the next 5 hours I have a boost of pleasure in my body. My body feels better, moves better, works better because of that activity, right? So then if you're looking at pleasure in terms of a longer term beneficial impact, and it's just kind of substituting things or adding things that had that long-term pleasurable impact on your health and well-being. Eating good food, right? If you eat good food and that good food fuels your body and gives you a lot of energy and clarity of thought and keeps you lean and trim and that kind of thing with the choices you've made, well, that's pleasure in a long-term kind of thing. If I have a hit of eating a big bag of potato chips, I might have a pleasurable experience while I'm doing it. But then for the next 5 hours, my stomach's upset, and my energy's low, and I got a headache, or those kind of things. Once you start having the awareness of the kind of the more longer term impacts, is that kind of your? Am I summarizing the way you read it as well? You saw
I,
it.
yeah, that's certainly one part of it. For me, one of the things was really interesting, and being in education and opening our schools in Japan, one of the things we looked at is choices and willpower and helping. Oh, that's your water bottle. It was as big as you were because it was closer to the camera. I'm like, holy
Yeah.
cow. Alan's being attacked by the 45-gallon drum of water. Anyway, sorry. Perspective is everything. And one of the classic examples is the cookie test. And so what they would do is they would take a plate of cookies and tell a child, now don't eat the cookies. When I come back, if you haven't eaten the cookies, you can have all the cookies. Right? I'm simplifying.
Yeah.
And so the children that would postpone the gratification, and they knew it was wrong to take the cookies, and some kids would like sneak one cookie, some kids would just go bah and eat all the cookies, and um take that instant gratification over the delayed gratification. And then they followed those children's progress. And the children who delayed their, or were able to delay their gratification, did better in life. I mean, in terms of traditional markers, I have to be careful because better is subjective, right? But in terms of health, in terms of achievement and goal attainment and those types of things, the ability to make a judgment and we were looking at in terms of willpower and child development and all of those things. But what I find Dr. Chestnut was talking about is how, so there's so multi-billion-dollar market on health and wellness, right? There's a new diet and a new this and try that. And, he talks about the diet of a giraffe, right? There's one diet for a giraffe. You can develop 1,000, but for the genome of giraffes, basically all we have to do is find out what's good for a giraffe and what's bad for a giraffe. Same with us. I know a donut is bad for me. I don't need, a lecture on carbohydrates and the complex bonding of high fructose syrup. And I know it's bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if I've experienced, and I think this is sort of how it comes down to, if I've experienced that dopamine release or pleasure from eating the donut, then when I'm low on dopamine, and he talks about dopamine, i.e. pleasure, being a required nutrient for human beings. If you don't have pleasure, and he also talks later in the video about how when people get to the point they don't believe they're going to have pleasure in their life, when they're living without pleasure and they don't believe they're going to have it anymore, is often when they decide to end their life.
Yeah.
Right.
There is no hope, right?
Yeah.
That they've lost, that then they have no hope kind of a thing as well, right? Yeah.
Which is why hope is, right? That's the name of our show, is Hopeify,
Yeah.
83, because it's key. But, that idea, and I know from the painkillers I'm on, and they're opioids, and when I don't take them on time, because I don't like taking them, I don't find them psychologically pleasurable, right? Like I don't get high and think, woohoo, I'm happy. The absence of pain. Why? Because my brain is releasing dopamine and all kinds of painkillers, right? The drug is causing my brain to produce the painkiller. That's what's, override the pain. But when I don't take it on time, because I don't like taking them, my body punishes me, right? I start to shake. I feel cold. My eyes start to water. I start to yawn uncontrollably because my body is saying, give us that back, because we want those release of chemicals again, right? And Dr. Chestnut talks about how in modern society we have so many bad choices that prey on our evolutionary need. Because in the past, a caveman, and he talks about sexual deviancy, we had to find sex pleasurable. We had to get a dopamine hit from it, or our species wouldn't have existed, right?
Yes,
And,
exactly. Yeah.
and if you look at species with low sex drives, they obviously have a population problem. And when we look at trying to save species that were driving to extinction, a lot of them are because they have long mating cycles, right? Where, like, look at rabbits or kangaroos, where they have very, very short periods where they can have litters repeatedly, and they're almost always in heat. I guess that's not something non-farm people would know. They're always horny. They produce lots of babies, right? And they populate. Had we not felt pleasure from that, we would have died out when we were on the plains of Africa, right?
Yeah.
The same carbohydrates, right?
He says that if we didn't find sex pleasurable, we would have died out. And like, or if we could have sex one time and we're good for 10 years, well, the species would not survive. And same thing if we found that one meal was satisfying for us. Hey, I wouldn't feel like eating again because that was so satisfying for us. Well, then we would starve to death, right? We have these drives, and it's kind of the choices we make, and the better the choices become, that they're pleasurable now, but pleasurable go forward as well, right? And a longer term impact, the more we can do make changes that benefit our life without relying on willpower, right? Without, having to say, oh, I'm going to power through this and that kind of a thing. Because I
Oh,
don't know. Go
that,
ahead.
his story about, and I love that, and you mentioned that, and it's in my notes and it's bolded, because people, when I've been struggling with losing all the weight, and that's interesting because even with like being fed through a tube, so there was no cheating of the diet. I was in coma and being fed through a tube. My body was gaining weight
Yeah.
because I have that primitive gene that would have survived like 10,000 years ago. Thumbs up. My offspring would have survived in famine and, eating rocks and dirt. They would have gained weight and survived. Now, where calories are so abundant, it's not a healthy gene to have, right?
No.
And
No.
everyone in my family's big, whatever. Anyway, going back to what we were talking about, that idea that, where was I? Oh, yeah, genetics and how the I've lost it. I got lost in my own thought there thinking about genetics. What were we talking about before I started talking about genetics?
Well,
Oh,
we're
Dr. Chestnut. Yeah. So I
yeah.
was going to say that my uncle and my aunt were both diagnosed with cancer some time ago, and they went to an oncologist out of South America. And I want to send you the book that he wrote because he was in a death camp and in South America, and he had lots of people around him, and some people would thrive and survive, even though they were getting beat and fed rotten food and starved and tortured. And other people, for less apparent reason, would die. And it was just that, that willpower, that hope that you were talking about, and how our bodies are designed to survive. And in the past, we didn't have those choices, right?
No.
Like starch, fat. Think about it. Why is fat pleasurable? Because it's survival. If you look at, far northern Aboriginal peoples, native peoples, they covet fat, whale fat and blubber. Why? Survival. I watched a survival show, a guy in Alaska, and he killed a moose, but the moose meat was too lean, and he was at risk of being medically kicked out of the contest because the moose wolverines had stolen the fat in the night from the moose. That's what they went for,
Mm-hmm.
because in those conditions, the fat is what survival is. And
Mm-hmm.
even though he had all this lean protein, he was malnourished because there was very little fat on a moose.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the fat he had was stolen, right? And
Yeah.
so Dr. Chestnut's point is right now in time, we have so many unhealthy sources of dopamine pleasure that we need willpower that we're not genetically programmed with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just as we've discussed on this show previously, the food manufacturers, work on our on those, instincts, if you will, or those long-term type things that human things in terms of crunch and salt and sweet, those sort of flavors, those kind of attributes to make us crave that food, right? But they're nutrient uh deficient, right? So then what does that mean? We want to eat more of it because we don't feel satisfied because we're not getting the nutrients with those choices. So if we keep on eating more and more to satisfy the craving that we have, but we never feel sated because the nutrient density is not there, well, what happens, right? We just gain a whole bunch of weight, right? And in times when there was a famine, that was great. That weight kind of kept us going. But when we can go to the grocery store and there's 5,000 food choices that are readily available, and fresh fruits and fresh vegetables, and like everything is right there, and we choose the right foods which are pleasurable for our body now, but it also means that we are sated or satisfied with those choices because of their nutrient density as well, right? So then that gives us a long term optimal functioning for our bodies, right? Without willpower, just like it just kind of happens, right? So
But there's and I was just hit by it today, something that you always talk about, and that's the need to reset our internal clock, right? Like everything, you should take a break from everything. And we dug out of our boxes in the basement our old food dehydrator, because we had a bunch of apples, and we had tried to donate them to a charity, but there was a problem with manpower, people power, and they couldn't use them anyway. So brought up the dehydrator, and we had some tomatoes. I like tomatoes. Put the tomatoes in the dehydrator, and I was reading, it said like cut a 1/4 inch thick slice of tomato. I'm like, boy, that seems like a lot. Okay, whatever, I haven't done it in a while. Cut them up, dehydrated, and they come out like chips, right? Like a potato chip. Popped one in my mouth, and I'm like, wow, that is so good. And, in reviewing my notes and thinking about all the things you've taught me and shared with our viewers and everyone, is that I'm so used to that strong, concentrated taste, right? Like there's, in Japan where soda pop isn't popular, it didn't used to be, boy, we stopped drinking it because it was way too sweet, right? Like just unbearably sweet. Western cakes and chocolates compared to other markets have so much sugar and fat in them. And I found myself loving this little tomato chip. Why? Because my body was so used to such strong flavors and taste that when it was concentrated down by the dehydrator, it was pleasurable. Had I eaten just the ordinary slice, it would have been like, no, okay, I like tomatoes, right? But when it was concentrated, my body's like, oh, that tastes good. Let's have more of that, right? So
Yeah.
it was a good example of how your philosophy of taking a break from everything to let your body sort of bring those levels down tied exactly within with what Dr. Chestnut was saying, because I purposely lower. And boy, if you're taking opioids, I really suggest working with a pain specialist. I work with a great doctor, and she helps me lower the amount every month, a little
Mm,
bit, a little bit, a little bit. Because normally, as you know, it normally goes up and up and up and up, because our bodies adjust to it, right? So
yeah.
we need a little
Yeah.
more, a little
Yeah.
more. And yeah, it's definitely something that ties right in with what Dr. Chestnut said. We live in a time where we're not equipped. Evolutionarily, we went through the Industrial Revolution. We took a jump ahead as a species where we could suddenly produce all this food and electricity and heat, and we're not really prepared for it.
Yeah. And the other part too is that the now it is so easy for us as well. So we reduce our activity levels. Our kinetic flow would be the term that Dr. Yanni Witten would use. And kinetic flow is so important in terms of our health and well-being, right? We're made to move.
Mhm.
And sitting for extended period of times terribly, terribly bad for us, right? And then we do that so much, and we often sit, and then we're looking at our phone like this as we sit. So we're causing all kinds of posture problems that impacts our ability to breathe fully, those kind of things. So it's the food, and then it's the activities as well, right? Because if the food is just readily available, we don't have to go pick it out of the garden. We don't have to pick it from the tree. We don't have to harvest it in any way. It just pick it off the shelf kind of a thing. And especially where it's a packaged food that you don't even have to cook it or prepare it, just open the bag and eat it kind of a thing, right? You can consume so many calories with no kinetic flow and no nutrient and not satisfying in a nutrient sense as well, right? So
Well, and you brought me right back to the point that I had forgotten. Thanks, Al. And that's when you were talking about trying harder. And we have this belief that, oh, if I try harder, I just need to eat less, I need to work more, I need to do those things. But Dr. Chestnut talks about, he talks about Chicago and Detroit, but Edmonton and Calgary work better here. Is if I have a map for Calgary and I'm wandering around Edmonton, it doesn't matter how fast I run, it doesn't matter how much I look, I am not going to find what I'm looking for, because I have a map for Calgary
yeah,
and I'm in Edmonton.
yeah,
And, he was talking about how basically that we know what's good for us.
mm,
It's not really complicated. And our bodies give us tremendous feedback on that if we're open to it, right?
hmm, Hmm.
But if we walk around, and that's, I think, where he talks about the pleasure anchors, right? If we've created a bunch of pleasure anchors, and by that he means, like I play video games, it releases dopamine. I like it. It makes me happy. I play it with my daughters, which makes me even happier, right? The problem is I'm fortunate in that I don't have a lot of time to do it, and my daughters aren't around all the time. But if I was unemployed and they were around the house, it would become addictive. It would something that would take over a lot of our time because, it's bright, it's flashy, it's fast, it's like a cat and a toy. Your brain's firing all kinds of things. But like you say, you're sitting down, you get all of this pleasure, and your brain says, "Oh yeah, that's where I can get it." And that creates what he calls a pleasure anchor. So when I'm low on dopamine and that nutrient of pleasure, your body looks for the closest, fastest, highest fix it can get. And in our society, those are often not the best choices in the long term, like you said.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and it's just that we have programmed ourselves, right? Because our bodies are like children with those cookies. They're like, I don't care where it comes from. I need it now,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And so when he talks about changing your not ethics, what does he call it? Integrity. What he's talking about is that that a better way to get that is, going for a walk. You would get the same release, plus your body kinetic flow would increase, making you healthier and happier. But that little child that wants that dopamine now, I'm sorry, I'm sort of painting children with a black mark, and I don't mean to be, but that primitive self, right? Because if you were in the Sahara Desert in our ancestry and you decided to walk across the desert for a tree you saw 15 miles away or thought you saw, instead of eating the one right in front of you, you're going to die,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Yep.
So if we're programmed to look for the easiest low hanging fruit, that's
Yep.
survival.
Yep.
But we're not in the survival game anymore,
No,
right?
exactly.
So
Exactly.
we're wandering around Edmonton with a map for Calgary, and I
Yep.
thought that was such a great point.
I thought so too. And I also liked his kind of, don't be beating yourself up about whatever your things are right now.
Mhm.
You're engaging in those or consuming those things because that is what, works, that it does release dopamine. It does produce pleasure for you, but add something, just the smallest thing that adds pleasure in a more sustainable long-term way, right? Whatever that is. His example is, you know, one, you should eat more fruits, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, how about, what could you do? Well, I like grapes. Great. Eat grapes. Grapes are fruit. Great.
Mhm.
Eat some grapes, right? And then the idea is just that addition then moves you down a path where it's not you're using willpower, you're doing something that you resonates with you, that aligns with you. That's where his integrity comes in, is that's the way I read it. And then doing that, then you're kind of on a path to incremental improvements in your ability to produce pleasurable feelings in your body, but in a sustainable way. And at some point in time, well, maybe you're going to give up less long-term pleasurable things for more. And we know, like, we've had the conversation about sugar before, right?
Mhm.
Sugar, oh my goodness, like, it's super pleasurable, of course, but it's super addictive as well, right? And it messes up your whole microbiome as well. And then it basically kind of, the colony of sugar in your gut kind of takes over the signaling to your brain, and it just becomes a more sugar, bring the sugar, more sugar. And that's kind of what your body starts responding to. When you take a break from it, all of a sudden, like, the sweetness in a piece of tomato that's dehydrated,
Yeah.
or the sweetness in an apple, is, oh man, that's super, that's very satisfying. Hey, so
Mhm.
yeah.
No, I think that's an extremely good point. And one of the other things that him and Dr. Yanni talked about was that how when we move from the tribal right, into our modern societies, how we can, because it's insane as a society. How did we get to the point that we're promoting, things that are bad for children? How did we have companies whose sole purpose is to find out what we're addicted to, what'll ring that dopamine bell the hardest and the fastest, that can be produced the cheapest, and sell that as a product? Well, it's the anonymity that modern civilization gives us. And he talks about, and I found this really interesting from a social perspective, how in traditional societies, in tribes, there was a communal meal, or later at church, or you had to see the people, everyone in your community, at least once a week. You had to look them in the eye. So if somebody stole your coat, and they're wearing it around, they're going to have to face you.
Yeah.
Right. If you're doing those things, and it's the same, why can we poison ourselves? And I remember reading a great paper on how the limited liability company led to many of the problems in modern civilization, because we no longer have to take responsibility for our actions. The whole point of a limited liability company is to do things that we don't want to put our name to.
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
No, very, very well said. And
And,
that, because you would never have, I mean, when you and I were growing up, we had
mhm.
cartoons that
Yeah.
we watched. And then in those cartoons, it was always the sugar sweet type cereals, right? That were
Yeah.
advertising like crazy. And we'd be pulling on our mom's skirt saying, "Mom, I need to have the frosted choky chocoboodles," or whatever they're
Yeah.
called, right? And so that's so, but would that, would any of the people that individually in that corporation who's producing this poison for our bodies say to their, their grandchild or their loved one, "Yeah, this is the stuff we want you to eat"? No, it'd say, "No, here, let me get you an apple, Timmy. Let me, that's not good for you," right? But because, as you said, the anonymity and the, well, we can do this because, well, it's all about money, and it's all about, looking after our shareholders and that kind of thing, then we lose, we've lost respects, kind of the compassion and the connection with the people that we should be most trying to support and getting what they need to have a good life, right?
Well,
So
it's not even evil. Like, I grew up on an active ranch, and the cattle that we butchered for ourselves, we didn't inject with hormones and all of those things. We would set a couple of calves aside. We didn't push them. We didn't give them a bunch of steroids. We didn't give them a bunch of antibiotics. Why? And why did we do it for the commercial cattle? Because to survive, and we were survival. It wasn't, we weren't driving. And I'm not saying that people who drive, $160,000 trucks are evil, but farming and food production as an individual has become very difficult. Most farms are now corporate farms, exactly what you were talking about. They satisfy shareholders, they're not satisfying the market. And most food production is now about the fastest, the quickest, the cheapest to get that product to the market. But the people in the know, like I said, even us, a small farm, we always chose the clean alternative for what we ate. An example of exactly what you were saying. Now, were we evil? Were we thinking, ah, ha, 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 we're going to poison the people that eat our food at McDonald's or whatever? No, it was a business, right? To
yeah,
survive, to make our mortgage payment, to do all of those things. That's how the market worked. Not making excuses, but giving an example how that system works, right? That everyone everyone knows the game is fixed. It's not like there's people out there wandering around going, oh, well, not certainly in Alberta, Canada, saying they give animals steroids. The meat I have has steroids and antibiotics in it. Really? Holy cow! I didn't know that. Not happening,
not
right?
happen.
And
Yeah,
that's what Dr. Chestnut's saying is we know. It's
yeah,
not that we don't know,
yeah,
but we're arguing, and I found this so enlightening. We're arguing with ourselves. We're arguing with that need for dopamine,
yeah.
that quick hit of pleasure. And like you said, if we can just alter that a little bit, postpone it a little bit, our lives get better. Uh,
One thing, when back to the whole integrity part, I think the one thing that he had asked, he said, "Hey, I got my simple test. Every person in the whole world, if you ask them to give you 5 attributes that what makes a good human, they're all going to be the same things, right?
Yep.
Every person, every religion, every gender, every whatever, it doesn't matter. They're basically all going to be the same things. And then that's the part about living in integrity, that you live with what we all agree, whether we've said it before, whether we've expressed it or not, is that we all agree these are the attributes that good human beings have, right? I love that. And it makes so much sense, right? We all are connected, and we all, want the same things, right? So,
And
there's a little, oh, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead, Al. Sorry.
I was just going to say the little off topic, but I watched this video yesterday from Dr. Bruce Lipton. And are you familiar with him?
I think you mentioned him before.
Oh yeah, he's like, man, he's an epigenetics guy, right? And he's been doing this for so many years. But of course, he talks about when what uh, what happens with a child in the first like 7 years kind of creates their core beliefs that they will have for the rest of their lives.
Hmm.
And he was comparing that with the war currently going on in Israel, right? And so then he said he had pictures of, these little kids, 7, 8 years old, that are learning how to hold weapons and use weapons in Israel, and the same thing that are learning how to hold weapons, running weapons in Palestine. And then, so what do these kids learn? Well, we got to hate the other ones, and we have to use these to kill the other ones, right? That's what they learn. So then where does wars come from? War comes from that continual education of, to perpetuate those cycles of hate and injustice, and I'm right and they're wrong and they're not even human. Once you get the people together, like if you have the Palestinian kid and the Israeli kid meet, they would like be friends, and this would never ever happen, right? But because they've been conditioned that you have to hate that color or that religion, then that's where the wars ultimately come from, right? So, anyways, it was a beautiful video and made so much sense to me, right? If we realized our connectedness, war could never happen. War could never be a reality.
And there's so many optics now. And as you know, I study comparative religion, and I spent a lot of time in that world, and still do, talking to people of different religions and faiths. And and I know right now there's a lot going on about Islam and Muslims, and I'm a Christian because of geography, right? I was raised in a Christian community, in a Christian family from European settlers, and we were all Christian, Protestant or Catholic. Those are the only two flavors of religion that we had, right?
Yep.
Period. So where I was born, that was the choice. Why do we eat bread instead of rice? Geography, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yep.
all it is.
Yep.
Anyway, so many people talk, and I know, like Dr. Chestnut said, under those 5 main headings, there's no, murder, there's no cheating, there's no stealing. And, I see people talking about, oh, the Crusades, Christians went out and killed people. Well, actually, that was humans wanting money and greed and property. The modern sort of television Muslim view, oh, kill Christians, I hate you because you're not Muslim. Mohammed said to kill anyone who's not Christian. That's not about the fundamental, what Dr. Chestnut was talking about, that we all share. That's a perversion of those things, because he's 100% right. When you talk to people that haven't been radicalized, and we have some weird radicalization, and I took a great series of courses in anti-terrorism and about radicalization, and we're radicalized about food, we're radicalized about sex, we're radicalized about so many things in our society, that it's not normal, it's not healthy, because it's been so exaggerated, and so it's like the sugar in something. We can't even taste how sweet it is now, because there was so much sugar. It's like toothpaste. How much sugar is in toothpaste, modern toothpaste? It's astounding. Like, it's crazy. Like, the
Hmm.
amount of sugar in modern toothpaste. Because when we dealt with kids that were having, were on Ritalin and lots of the drugs coming out of North America normally, one of the things we would do is look at their home habits and how much hidden sugar they're being exposed to. And often, like, there's sugar in toothpaste and there's sugar in so many things. By reducing the amount of refined sugar in the children's diets, and they were good parents. It wasn't, I mean, I made my kids brush their teeth with toothpaste every night, every morning. But an alternative, not all kids can handle that amount of stimulation or that amount of, highly refined sugar in their diets. There's so many opportunities in our society not to do what's right. And like Dr. Chestnut said, we know, right? I don't need 50. I probably have 20 diet books around here.
Yeah.
I don't need them. I know that a donut's bad for me, right? I know that a tomato or a carrot are good for me. And they taste good if I give them a chance. I don't have
Yeah.
to drown them in sugar, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So I'm just going to put in the chat this um, oh, website for Dr. James Chestnut thing, and he has a book. It's an amazing book, and I have not read it. I have it, but I have not read it as of yet. But it is called "Think Well, Eat Well, Move Well," and so evidence-based wellness and prevention is basically his thing. I'm I've I've got a taste of it. I love it. I think it makes so much sense. And I think it's also just a kinder, gentler way to make changes in your life that will enhance your ability to move well, think well, live well. And just by making small choices that are pleasure based now, but pleasure based in a sustainable way that will continue to contribute to your health today and next tomorrow and for the next 20 years kind of a thing. So, yeah.
I have an interesting story about that, and an interesting side story.
All right.
So, yeah, both. So I've known you for a long time now. What, as long as I've been back in Canada, you were like, I met you in the first 2 months I was back. So what is that? Maybe the girls are 21 now. They came back when they were like 9, yeah, 12, 13 years, right? We've been working together, being around each other a long time. And when I first met you, you had a sweet tooth, right? And,
Mm.
if we were having a coffee, bring Al a cookie, bring Al, something like this. And that just was normal, right? Al had a sweet tooth. He liked a little bit of, sugar with his coffee or whatever we were having, or, pop by the office, bring Al a little treat because, makes him happy. And we like Al, so bring him a treat, right? That's normal. And then, I don't know, like a month ago or something, you made some lunch for us, right? A mushroom burger.
Oh, portobello, yeah, portobello mushroom burger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it was not the burger was the mushroom. There was no meat there.
No, no, no.
Yeah, and you were geeking out about like some hummus. No, what was it? Oh,
Guacamole and hummus.
yeah. And I'm like, that's the same face he used to make. Remember, we used to get like McDonald's apple pie,
Uh-huh.
like because our
Yeah.
office was close, right?
Yeah.
So the girls would come by and they were like, "Oh, go get us a coffee and we'll get a McDonald's apple pie," which is like just, it's like sugar disguised as a pastry. But
Yeah.
and you were like so excited and so happy about this healthy food in that same sort of childlike way that 10 years ago, a McDonald's apple pie would excite you, right?
Yeah. That's
And
very
I thought, that's an incredible journey, in a very short period of time, because you had completely changed your value system, although you wouldn't articulate it like that, right? But like Dr. Chestnut was saying, you've changed your pleasure anchor.
yeah. Yeah.
And, now I wouldn't bring you an apple pie. I would bring you something that you would enjoy, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe some hummus and it's so interesting that I actually saw that anchor shift in your pleasure and what you were connecting. And I was just thinking about, what true friendship is, because that day you and I were fighting. We were not, not our usual congenial selves. We were disagreeing about, we were having bad days collectively, I guess. But friendship is when, even though I was angry at you, I still noticed that amazing shift in your personality. in a positive way. And you were there making food for us and sharing stuff and everything, even though you were angry. And that's, I think, the wonderful thing about friendship. And I think it's also the wonderful thing about gratitude, and just to be, no relationship, no anything is going to always be perfect. And, once in a while you may take the hit of the McDonald's apple pie. Oh, well, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean it's over. You're going to fight in a relationship. I mean, if you spend enough time with somebody, you're eventually going to run into 2 bad days, 2 bad situations, and you're going to have some friction. But, like Dr. Chestnut says, you have to accept that, forgive yourself and say, okay, yeah, that wasn't a good choice. Like I look at my situation now, my knee's blowing out, and I'm thinking, man, if I'm crippled, if I'm in that chair forever, what am I going to do? Because I've been pushing myself to get out of that chair, and I really want to run again. And what if that suddenly is no longer an option? Like, what if the doctor says to me and saying, boy, you've done it, your knee's gone and you're too big to operate on, you're in that chair. And I was thinking today, how would I handle that? Like psychologically, because my sort of pleasure anchor, my driving force has been, I want to get back so I can enjoy my friends and my family and wilderness. Like, I'm an outside guy. I love being outside, doing outside kind of stuff. Being inside drives me crazy. And, like he said, that little shift. So if that happens, as we talked about in other shows, I'm just going to have to accept it, but I'm going to have to find a way to find pleasure anchors in other things, right?
Yeah.
Hope in other things.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
So,
Yeah. No, makes good sense. All right, Scott, should we wrap her up for tonight?
we should, but I would really recommend anyone who's hurting, and we didn't really get into tonight, the end part of the video where they start talking about how this is important for pain, people that are suffering chronic pain, because it's just a wonderful, mind-blowing, changing experience. Like every time I watch it, I find new treasures in there. His book's probably amazing. So I'm going to close this up, but from my great friend ALLAN FRIESEN, the acapellist, and myself, Scott Sweetman, watch this video. I'll put the link in our post. Really, if you're experiencing pain, if you just want to live a better, healthier life, it's not as hard as it sounds. And, the deck is stacked against you, but we've evolved and survived Holocaust and world wars and all kinds of horrible things. Yeah, we can do it. And just be the best self you can, try and improve a little bit every day. And like my friend, the acapella, share yourself, get out there and be a force for good.
Get a Matson, keep yourself well.
Thanks.